Hey guys, tonight we're venturing deep into a world you've never walked through before. You're surrounded by towering trees, dripping with vines, a sticky breeze that carries the scent of moss and ripe fruit, and somewhere above the faint rustle of leaves signals movement. But not the quick scampering of monkeys or birds. No, this sound is slower, heavier, almost like the forest itself is shifting in slow motion. Because you've just arrived in ancient South America, and here you're sharing space with some of the most laid-back giants to ever walk the earth. Among them, one creature steals the show, the Megatherium, the great ground sloth, who basically invented chilling long before humans ever thought of hammocks or siestas. Of course, don't get too comfortable yet. You probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes here. Between towering predators, unpredictable weather, and the small problem of not being a 6-ton herbivore yourself, this isn't exactly your average nature walk. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move cautiously along a narrow trail, soft earth squishing beneath your feet. The trees loom overhead like giant green umbrellas. The air is thick with moisture, so much so that your clothes stick to your skin within minutes. The forest hums with live insects, buzzing frogs, croaking birds calling in long melodic whistles that echo between the trees. And yet, despite all this noise, there's a calming stillness that blankets everything, like nature itself is in no rush. Then you hear it, the deep, almost rhythmic rustle of leaves ahead. Your eyes scan the trees expecting to see something darting or flapping. But instead, you catch sight of a massive shaggy form, lumbering slowly beneath the canopy. There it is, Megatherium. Standing nearly 20 feet tall on its hind legs, the creature dwarfs everything around it. Its fur is a patchwork of thick brown and tan, shaggy like an old wool sweater. The claws are absurdly long, curved like scythes, but surprisingly delicate in how they handle the branches overhead. This is a creature that doesn't so much walk as sway its massive weight, pressing deep prints into the forest floor with every ponderous step. You half expect it to bellow or roar like some movie monster, but no. Instead, it moves with a sleepy grace, pausing often to sniff the air and casually rake leaves into its mouth with those giant claws. It's as if it knows it's too big to fear anything, and frankly, it kind of is. At this point in history, roughly 10,000 years ago, you wouldn't find many predators willing to pick a fight with this walking fortress. Even saber-toothed cats like Smilodon usually preferred smaller, less dangerous prey. A full-grown Megatherium was just too much trouble for too little reward. And unlike its modern tree-hugging sloth cousins who move at the speed of molasses, Megatherium could move surprisingly fast when motivated. Sure, not cheetah fast, but definitely enough to make a hungry predator think twice. As you watch, it reaches up toward a low-hanging branch, wraps its enormous claws around it, and pulls it down to its mouth. The leaves crunch softly as it chews, eyes half-lidded in a kind of eternal afternoon nap expression. You can't help but feel a little envious. This creature lives like it's permanently on vacation. Historians still argue whether Megatherium was strictly herbivorous or if it might have occasionally scavenged meat. Some propose that it may have used those powerful claws, not just for defense or foraging, but possibly to dig up roots or even tear into carcasses left by other predators. but the general consensus leans toward plants being its mainstay. After all, when you weigh several tons, you need a near constant supply of leaves, fruit, and soft vegetation to keep that engine running. The forest around you seems almost built for creatures like this. South America during the Pleistocene was a lush paradise of endless green, sprawling grasslands and thick forests filled with all sorts of now extinct megafauna. There were glyptodons, giant armored relatives of armadillos, the size of Volkswagen beetles, towering terror birds, and the occasional lumbering mastodon. But Megatherium was one of the undisputed giants. You take a few cautious steps closer, marveling at how little the beast seems to care about your presence. Its hearing isn't great, and its eyesight probably wouldn't win any awards either. But its nose is sharp. The wide wet nostrils flare as it sniffs the air, detecting your scent. For a brief moment, its small, dark eyes turn in your direction. You freeze, heart pounding. But after a few seconds, it resumes its lazy snacking entirely unbothered. You're not worth the effort. And honestly, that's Megatherium in a nutshell. Massive, powerful, and supremely indifferent. Its world is one of slow movements, constant feeding, and very little drama. Even its mating habits likely reflected this laid-back approach, with courtship displays that might have involved slow sways, soft vocalizations, and gentle nudges rather than violent contests of strength. The ground beneath your feet trembles slightly as it shifts its weight, and you realize that you're standing in the footprints of ancient giants who once roamed these lands in great numbers. Fossilized trackways found in places like Argentina still preserve the impressions of Megatherium herds, moving together slowly, yes, but with a kind of prehistoric dignity. What's remarkable is that this creature wasn't even the largest of its kind. Megatherium americanum, the species you're staring at, was among the biggest, but some of its relatives like Eremotherium could grow even more massive, especially further north. Their distribution stretched from modern-day Argentina all the way into parts of North America. As the sun starts to dip lower behind the trees, casting long golden rays through the branches, you sit down on a nearby mossy rock and simply watch. The Megatherium leans back slightly on its powerful hind legs, almost as if reclining. You half expected to pull out a coconut drink with a tiny umbrella. If nature ever designed a creature whose entire existence revolved around not stressing out, Megatherium would be that creature. The Megatherium shifts, again, its massive claws gently curling around a sturdy trunk for support. You watch as it leans back slightly, like it's about to settle into a hammock that nature forgot to string up. And honestly, if there was ever a creature that deserved a permanent hammock, it's this one. Standing here, you're struck by just how well this giant is adapted for its slow-paced lifestyle. Its legs are thick columns of bone and muscle built less for sprinting and more for simply holding up an extraordinary amount of weight. Imagine balancing 6 small cars on your back every day. That's the kind of strain Megatherium's body endures. And yet, it moves with a strange kind of grace, as if gravity itself is more of a gentle suggestion than a hard rule. The forelimbs, though, that's where things get interesting. Each arm is long and surprisingly flexible, ending in those infamous claws that stretch nearly a foot in length. They're not like a predator's talons honed for ripping into flesh. Instead, they're more like nature's gardening tools, perfect for grasping branches, stripping leaves, and occasionally digging into soft earth for roots or tubers. Now, you might assume that something this large would need to constantly stuff its face just to survive, and you'd be correct. A megatherium could easily consume hundreds of pounds of vegetation every single day. Leaves, fruits, flowers, bark, anything green. And chewable was fair game. But what's remarkable is how efficient it was at gathering food. Those claws allowed it to reach higher than most other herbivores of its time, reducing competition. If giraffes are the treetop nibblers of modern Africa, then Megatherium was South America's shaggy, ground-bound equivalent. And yet, not everything about Megatherium's anatomy screams perfect design. Take its skull, for instance. Large but oddly delicate, with a mouth shaped more like a blunt pair of garden shears than powerful jaws. Its teeth lacked the enamel that most mammals use for chewing, instead relying on layers of ever-growing dentin to handle the daily wear of munching through fibrous plants. Basically, its teeth were the prehistoric equivalent of self-sharpening kitchen knives, endlessly renewing but never particularly glamorous. There's a quirky little debate among paleontologists about how flexible Megatherium's tongue might have been. Some argue that, like modern giraffes and certain primates, it had a long prehensile tongue that helped pull leaves closer. Others suggest its lips and claws did most of the heavy lifting. Unfortunately, tongues don't fossilize well, so the great tongue debate continues to this day. You crouch lower, studying its feet as it shuffles. Unlike modern sloths, which hang from trees with long curved toes, Megatherium walked on the sides of its feet, an adaptation known as pedolateral walking. Picture a ballerina who insists on walking on the edges of her slippers. This sideways gait helped it balance its tremendous weight and protect those precious claws from constant contact with the hard ground. Suddenly, a flock of brightly colored prehistoric parrots bursts from the trees overhead, startled by your presence, or perhaps by the sloth itself shifting its bulk. The sound is brief, chaotic, and oddly cheerful, a sharp contrast to the Megatherium's steady, almost meditative rhythm. Even as you take all this in, you can't help but wonder how such a massive creature managed to stay cool under the oppressive tropical heat. Surprisingly, its shaggy fur may have served a dual purpose. Some paleontologists speculate that the dense coat protected it not just from cool nights, but also from biting insects that swarm these ancient forests like tiny flying vampires. Imagine being a walking banquet table for every bloodsucker in a 100-mile radius. Yeah, not ideal. And then there's the matter of its metabolism. You might expect such a gigantic animal to burn energy like a furnace. But Megatherium's slow movements and herbivorous diet likely meant it operated more like an energy-efficient refrigerator. Low energy output, a steady input, and very little waste. It didn't need to move fast because it rarely had to. Historians still argue whether Megatherium had any form of complex social behavior. Some fossil sites suggest multiple individuals may have congregated in the same area, possibly even forming loose groups or temporary herds. Others argue these were simply overlapping feeding territories. If they did socialize, though, you can imagine their conversations being about as exciting as two friends nodding off mid-sentence. You glance at your surroundings again. The jungle seems both ancient and timeless, a place where the clock moves at a pace few modern creatures could tolerate. Vines drape like curtains from the canopy above, and giant ferns unfurl like living umbrellas beneath your feet. You spot a curious armadillo the size of a modern SUV, probably a glyptodont, lumbering through the undergrowth nearby, its armored shell glinting faintly under filtered sunlight. It's a reminder that Megatherium wasn't alone in this oversized world. But even among giants, Megatherium stood out for its sheer audacity to do, well, almost nothing. It didn't charge like a mastodon, sprint like a terror bird, or stalk like a saber-tooth. It simply existed, calmly, confidently, and stubbornly slow. And yet, there's a strange kind of majesty in that. Here was a creature that had perfected the art of doing just enough, no more, no less. In a world often ruled by tooth and claw, Megatherium thrived by taking its time, savoring every moment, every leaf, every lazy stretch of its long arms toward the nearest snack. As the sun begins its descent, casting soft golden beams through the trees, the Megatherium lowers itself onto its haunches once again. For a moment, it almost seems to sigh like an old man settling into his favorite chair after a long day of absolutely nothing. And you, standing just a few paces away, find yourself oddly comforted. In a world that's constantly rushing, maybe we could all take a lesson from this ancient master of the slow life. The sky darkens slowly as twilight slides over the prehistoric canopy, and you remain near the Megatherium, who appears entirely unbothered by the passage of time. With its heavy body resting comfortably, you begin to notice details you hadn't seen before. Subtle hints at how nature fine-tuned this giant for a lifestyle built entirely around not hurrying. You study its enormous ribcage, rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. The lungs tucked inside are vast, designed to process massive volumes of air with minimal effort. Scientists believe that for an animal, this size-efficient oxygen use was critical. It couldn't afford the energetic cost of panicked breathing or sudden bursts of speed. Every part of Megatherium's physiology whispers the same message: conserve, conserve, conserve. Its heart beats slowly, methodically. If you were close enough, you might even feel the gentle thump vibrating through the ground beneath your feet. Like many modern sloths, its pulse likely remained calm even under mild stress, which, let's be honest, was probably most of the time. Megatherium simply didn't get worked up about much. Historians still argue whether its slow pace was entirely due to metabolic limits, or if this was simply nature's chosen strategy for dealing with its massive size. Some suggest that being slow wasn't a flaw, but rather a successful design choice. Why rush when you weigh as much as an elephant and have few natural predators? Suddenly, the Megatherium reaches upward again, and this time, you notice the peculiar way its limbs rotate outward. Unlike many mammals, its shoulder joints allow an almost circular range of motion, giving it remarkable reach for grabbing distant branches. It's almost like watching a crane arm unfold, carefully positioning itself before delicately plucking a leafy treat. And speaking of treats tonight, it seems particularly fond of the soft, fleshy fruits dangling from nearby trees. The way it handles them is almost comical. Those massive claws delicately grasp the fruit, gently pulling it toward its lips as if it's handling fine crystal instead of dinner. You watch the thick lips purse around the fruit and pull it in, followed by loud, contented munching. You can't help but smile. Despite its size and intimidating features, there's a peaceful, almost meditative quality to watching Megatherium feed. It's as if every bite is a small ritual part of the slow rhythm of its existence. And yet, despite its gentle image, you're reminded of the raw power bundled inside that massive frame. Scientists estimate that a full-grown Megatherium could easily flip a small car or a large predator if sufficiently annoyed. Those claws, while primarily tools for feeding, could become terrifying weapons if needed. This defensive ability may explain why so few predators dared to test their luck against adult Megatheriums. However, younger or weaker individuals weren't always so lucky. Some fossilized bones show puncture marks likely caused by giant short-faced bears or packs of dire wolves, both of which roam these forests alongside Megatherium. You take a moment to scan the underbrush, half expecting to spot one of these ancient predators lurking in the shadows. But the jungle remains calm tonight. The only disturbance is the gentle buzz of insects circling your head and the occasional screech of some distant bird settling in for the evening. You shift your gaze back to Megatherium and marvel at its feet once more. Each hind foot supports the entire rear bulk of the creature, allowing it to rear up vertically to reach even higher branches. Few creatures in history could balance so much weight so effortlessly. It's essentially a skyscraper that can squat. There's even speculation, though still debated, about whether Megatherium occasionally sat upright for extended periods like a bear, leaning against a tree, allowing it to rest while still nibbling at nearby foliage. Some have even gone as far as calling it nature's original hammock lounger, leaning back against tree trunks or rocky slopes, as though reclining in prehistoric leisure. As the stars begin to appear above the swaying canopy, you notice how quiet the forest becomes. The cacophony of the daytime jungle fades into a hushed, breathy stillness. This is when Megatherium thrives most. Without the heat of the midday sun, it can roam longer, feeding under moonlit skies with only the rustle of branches betraying its presence. You take a few careful steps to follow it. Despite its massive bulk, it moves with surprising silence, almost ghost-like among the trees. Its shaggy fur muffles the sound of branches snapping underfoot. You realize that this wasn't just some accident of evolution. It likely helped avoid unnecessary attention from the few predators foolish enough to stalk it. Interestingly, recent studies suggest Megatherium may have had a highly sensitive nose, not only for detecting food but for sniffing out potential danger. Picture a living, breathing smoke detector for scents. This keen sense of smell paired with its cautious pace likely helped it avoid most conflicts entirely. You glance upward and for the first time notice something odd. Strips of bark missing from the higher branches, long scrape marks spiraling upward as though giant fingers raked them clean. Those are Megatherium's calling cards. Unlike modern sloths, which barely disturb their trees, Megatherium left behind unmistakable signs of its presence. Even tens of thousands of years later, fossilized tree bark shows patterns believed to be the remnants of its midnight snacks. There's also evidence, quirky and controversial, that some ancient South American rock art may depict large sloth-like figures, suggesting that early humans shared these forests with Megatherium and left behind crude, wide-eyed portraits of these furry behemoths. Of course, whether these images truly represent Megatherium or are simply artistic imagination remains hotly debated by scholars. As you trail behind your massive companion, you feel oddly small in its shadow, and yet strangely safe. Megatherium doesn't care about you. It doesn't hunt, it doesn't flee. It simply continues methodical, patient, utterly unbothered by your presence. Eventually, the creature pauses beside a wide, low-lying tree. It extends one arm, hooks its claws over a thick branch and gently leans backward. For a moment, you swear it almost looks like it's rocking, swaying slightly under the starlight, like a man relaxing in an invisible hammock beneath the ancient sky. And with that image planted firmly in your mind, you too feel your breathing slow and your muscles soften, lulled into Megatherium's world of quiet, deliberate peace. The night hums around you, now a soft chorus of chirps, distant howls, and the occasional hoot from an unseen owl. But your attention remains locked on the Megatherium, who continues its slow-motion, midnight buffet as if it has all the time in the world, which, to be fair, it pretty much does. You're witnessing one of the great luxuries of being too big to worry, the ability to live life without much fear, while smaller creatures skitter and hide at every rustle. Megatherium moves at its own leisurely pace, but that doesn't mean it's invincible. Nature is rarely that generous. As you watch, you spot faint claw marks gouged into a nearby tree trunk several feet above your head. They're old, weathered, and wide, far too large to belong to the sloth itself. This was the work of one of the few threats Megatherium might have faced, the Arctotherium, South America's giant short-faced bear. This predator, standing nearly as tall as Megatherium on its hind legs, was built like a tank fused with a sprinter. While Megatherium was slow and deliberate, Arctotherium could cover ground frighteningly fast. And although it likely preyed more often on smaller animals, there's no doubt that the occasional young or sick Megatherium may have fallen victim to this massive bear's hunger. Historians still argue whether these two giants regularly crossed paths or mostly coexisted without much drama. Some propose that Arctotherium might have scavenged Megatherium carcasses rather than risk full confrontations. Others argue that the bear's brute strength and speed made it a real contender when food was scarce. You crouch lower, imagining such a showdown. The bear charges, teeth bared, roaring like a living nightmare. The Megatherium rears up 6 tons of fur and muscle, slashing its meter-long claws through the air. It wouldn't have been a quick or quiet fight, but most of the time these battles likely never happened. Both giants had other priorities, and Megatherium, with its excellent sense of smell, probably detected danger long before the bear arrived. Avoidance was always better than confrontation when possible. And let's not forget the saber-toothed cats. Smilodon, populator the largest of its kind, roamed these very lands too. And while a full-grown Megatherium was a nightmare matchup for even the most powerful cat, juveniles may have been vulnerable. Fossil sites sometimes show bite marks that hint at such grim encounters. You feel a slight shiver imagining it all. Here you are watching a gentle plant muncher, but its world was far from peaceful. Nature always balances her scales even among the giants. Still, Megatherium wasn't entirely defenseless. Those claws weren't just for show. Some scientists believe that a swiping Megatherium could easily disembowel a predator with a single lucky strike. And given its sheer size, even a hungry carnivore had to calculate whether the risk was worth the potential meal. Most often, the answer was probably not. As your thoughts drift, so does the Megatherium. It moves forward again, swaying with that hypnotic rhythm, each step deliberate, every muscle cooperating like a well-rehearsed orchestra. You step lightly behind it, careful not to disturb its flow. The more you observe, the more you realize just how different Megatherium is from today's sloths. Modern tree sloths are by comparison tiny bundles of nerves, relying on camouflage slowness and sheer invisibility to avoid predators. But Megatherium, it didn't need to hide. Its defense was its size. In fact, scientists believe that its massive bulk served another surprising purpose: controlling its internal temperature. Like modern elephants, Megatherium's immense size likely helped buffer against sudden shifts in heat or cold, keeping its core body temperature remarkably stable. And yet, despite all these advantages, Megatherium's life wasn't completely carefree. As with any massive herbivore, its daily existence revolved around one obsession: food. A creature of this size needed to consume an incredible amount of plant matter. Some estimates suggest a megatherium could easily strip several entire trees in a single feeding session. And it wasn't picky. Tender leaves gone. Soft fruits delicious. Bark and branches crunchy snacks. If it was plant-based and chewable, megatherium ate it. You watch as it approaches a dense patch of young trees, pausing to investigate with slow, careful sniffs. It selects one, wraps its enormous claws around the trunk and gives a gentle tug. The tree resists for a moment before yielding with a soft creak. Leaves rustle. As megatherium pulls the branches closer to its mouth, stripping them with lazy determination. Oddly enough, some researchers have proposed that megatherium may have acted like a prehistoric gardener, shaping its environment with its foraging habits. By pulling down branches and clearing certain patches of forest, it may have unintentionally encouraged the growth of new vegetation, playing a quiet but important role in the ecosystem's balance. Historians still argue whether megatherium's foraging created permanent clearings or whether its impact was more localized. But the idea that this laid-back giant might have been a slow-motion landscape architect is oddly charming, isn't it? The forest feels especially ancient tonight. The moon breaks through the canopy in pale beams, illuminating patches of mossy ground, where massive footprints sink into the soft soil. You step into one, your entire foot, easily swallowed by the impression left behind. It's a strange moment standing where giants once stood, feeling their quiet presence even across millennia. You pause, listening to the forest breathe around you. Somewhere in the distance, a large, flightless bird lets out a haunting call, a reminder that you're not alone in this forgotten world. And still, the megatherium moves onward, unhurried, steady as the stars above. Its massive shadow glides ahead, a living monument to the art of patience. For a fleeting moment, you wonder if megatherium ever truly felt fear, or if it lived most of its life wrapped in the blissful ignorance of its own power. Whatever the answer, one thing is certain. Few creatures have ever lived with such perfect, unbothered confidence. The air grows cooler now, the night deepening. But your journey with this ancient giant is only beginning. The forest shifts around you as the night deepens, but megatherium continues on its lumbering path. You follow quietly, feeling almost like a ghost drifting in its wake. There's a strange peace here, a rhythm to the creature's slow, deliberate movements that makes everything else seem less important. And as you watch, you realize something else. Megatherium was never designed to hurry, because for most of its existence, it simply didn't have to. You glance up through the canopy where silver streaks of moonlight slice through the dense greenery. The leaves glisten faintly with dew, and the forest air is cool against your skin. Somewhere nearby, a giant ground, sloth-shaped shadow bends a sapling like it's a straw, casually munching on the tender shoots. It's almost comical watching something that could flatten a car treat a tree like a snack bar. But as you keep observing, you start to notice how this ancient ecosystem works in delicate balance. Megatherium isn't the only herbivore out here. There are other massive plant eaters roaming these same forests. Glyptodonts with their armored domes, toxodonts waddling like oversized hippos, and in certain regions, mastodons browsing the higher treetops. Together they share the buffet of the ancient world, each nibbling at different layers of vegetation. Historians still argue whether these herbivores competed fiercely or simply partitioned resources peacefully. Some believe Megatherium's ability to reach high thanks to its impressive claws and upright posture allowed it to feed where few others could, reducing direct competition. Others suggest that as populations swelled, overlap was inevitable and conflicts for prime feeding spots may have occurred, albeit very, very slowly. Of course, when you're this size, even a disagreement might have looked more like a sluggish shuffle than an all-out battle. You imagine two megatheriums glaring at one another for hours over a choice patch of leaves, perhaps eventually resolving their dispute with one slow-motion swipe, or simply walking away. Nobody here is wasting energy if they don't have to. And then there's the digestion. Oh, the digestion. When you're consuming hundreds of pounds of leaves and bark daily, your internal plumbing needs to be top-notch. Scientists believe Megatherium possessed a massive gut, packed with specialized bacteria that help break down tough plant fibers. In a way, you could think of its stomach as a giant fermentation chamber, slowly converting the vegetation into usable energy over many hours. One modern comparison: the elephant or the cow, both of which rely heavily on gut microbes to process their leafy meals. The main difference is scale. Megatherium was essentially a walking compost bin, the size of a minivan, turning plants into power at a glacial pace. And like all massive herbivores, its digestive efforts had side effects, namely copious amounts of well fertilizer. As Megatherium wandered, it likely spread nutrient-rich dung throughout the forest, inadvertently helping fertilize the very plants it fed upon. A true recycler of the ancient world. You walk a little closer now, studying the texture of its fur as it catches beams of moonlight. Surprisingly, it isn't a sleek coat you might expect. Instead, it's thick, coarse, and tangled, a combination of insulation and camouflage. But here's the quirky part: some scientists suggest that Megatherium's fur may have housed entire ecosystems of its own. Much like modern sloths, its hair could have provided a cozy habitat for algae, fungi, and insects. This living coat may have helped it blend into the forest even better, creating a mobile patch of mossy greenery as it wandered. Imagine carrying an entire mini ecosystem on your back. Truly multitasking at its finest. Historians still argue whether this microhabitat effect was as pronounced in Megatherium as it is in modern sloths, but the possibility is endlessly fascinating. You can't help but imagine tiny creatures crawling through its shaggy fur, while the great beast remains utterly indifferent. As you continue to follow, the terrain shifts slightly. The forest gives way to a wide riverbank, the moonlight shimmering across the slow-moving water. The Megatherium pauses at the edge, dipping its long snout toward the surface. You watch as it laps the water in slow, careful gulps, each movement measured and unhurried. And here lies another vulnerability crossing water. While Megatherium was built like a tank on land-water pose challenges, its bulk made swimming difficult, and paleontologists speculate that many of these giant sloths avoided deep water when possible. But shallow rivers like this one were likely manageable, and their footprints have been found fossilized along ancient floodplains and dried lakebeds. You sit for a moment watching the creature drink under the stars. The silence is almost hypnotic until something slithers through the nearby undergrowth. You tense for a moment only to spot a long shadow weaving through the reeds. A prehistoric snake. Perhaps a distant cousin of the Titanoboa, though smaller than its monstrous ancestor. Even these serpents give Megatherium a wide berth, knowing that a single misstep from this behemoth would spell disaster. The more you observe, the more you notice how little wasted motion exists in Megatherium's life. Every movement serves a purpose. It doesn't chase. It doesn't flee. It doesn't panic. Even its sleep, likely taken in short bursts, throughout the day fits into this cycle of maximum conservation. Scientists debate whether Megatherium had any form of fixed home range, or if it simply wandered endlessly following food and seasons like many modern herbivores. Some evidence suggests they may have migrated seasonally to track the growth of certain plants, but how far and how often remains a matter of ongoing study. But wherever it roamed, Megatherium carried its world with it, its fur, its bacteria, its habits, and its breathtaking indifference to the troubles of smaller creatures. It existed in a space where urgency simply didn't apply, a world of endless snacks, soft ground, and cool evening breezes. The moon drifts higher, casting its pale glow across the water as the Megatherium finishes drinking and ambles back toward the trees. You rise quietly, resuming your place behind it, eager to follow where this patient ancient traveler leads next. The Megatherium trudges forward, and you quietly follow your steps, sinking softly into the spongy forest floor. The air is thicker now, heavy with the sweet earthy smell of rotting leaves and blooming flowers. Insects drone lazily around you, their buzzing blending into the jungle's natural hum. And as you drift deeper into the ancient forest, you realize that this giant sloth you've been tailing is just one branch on a much larger family tree. A family of sloths that, frankly, has some pretty eccentric relatives. Long before Megatherium perfected its colossal hammock-loving lifestyle, smaller sloths were already mastering the art of slow living. You glance up into the dense canopy above, imagining modern tree sloths, dangling upside down from the branches, barely moving, barely breathing, almost invisible. While their distant cousins, they share the same underlying philosophy: move as little as necessary, conserve energy, survive. Historians still argue whether today's tree sloths evolved directly from these giant ground sloths, or whether they represent an entirely separate adaptation that just happens to mirror their ancestors' laziness on a smaller scale. Either way, sloths, both big and small, have found that in a world full of predators and competition, sometimes doing less is actually doing more. But Megatherium's family gets even weirder when you look beyond the trees. You step carefully around a shallow depression in the earth, noticing faint fossilized footprints frozen in time. Some belong to Megatherium, but others seem different, rounder, smaller, more curious. These belong to a relative that many people have never even heard of, Thalassocnus, the aquatic sloth. Yes, that's right, somewhere along the sloth family tree. One group decided that life on land was simply too much work and slid into the water instead. Thalassocnus roamed the ancient coastal waters of South America, using its strong clawed limbs to paddle along the seabed while feeding on seagrasses and kelp. Picture a furry manatee with claws. It's strange, but weirdly adorable. Of course, like many things in paleontology, scientists still argue how aquatic these sloths really were. Some believe they fully adapted to life in the water, while others think they simply waded along the shorelines like giant, shaggy otters. Either way, it's a reminder that the sloth lineage isn't just about laziness, it's also about adaptability. Whether swinging from trees, lounging in hammocks of leaves, or floating in coastal lagoons, sloths have always found a way to carve out their own unique niche. The Megatherium pauses at a clearing, now its silhouette framed against the shimmering sky. You notice how easily it navigates the uneven terrain despite its size. The powerful hind legs bend slightly while the broad padded feet spread its weight evenly across the ground. This same design allowed its ancestors to conquer not only dense forests, but open grasslands and even the drier regions of South America. You sit quietly listening as the forest breathes. Somewhere nearby, a giant armadillo-like glyptodont grunts softly as it shuffles along its dome shell reflecting starlight. The Pleistocene epoch wasn't just a time of giants, it was a time of strange experiments, where mammals filled ecological roles that today seem almost impossible. And that brings you to another bizarre cousin, Mylodon, roughly half the size of Megatherium but still huge. By today's standards, Mylodon once roamed the southernmost tip of South America. In the late 19th century, explorers famously discovered remarkably well-preserved Mylodon skin and dung inside a Chilean cave. For a brief moment, the world even speculated whether the creature might still be alive, hiding somewhere deep in Patagonia. Spoiler, sadly, no living Mylodons have turned up, but the fascination lingers. Those preserved remains give scientists an astonishing window into how these creatures lived. The thick, leathery hide was embedded with tiny bone nodules, called osteoderms, which acted like built-in armor. While Megatherium didn't seem to have these many of its cousins evolved their own personal suits of defense, historians still debate why some species developed armor, while others like Megatherium relied on sheer size alone. Perhaps it was simply a matter of region and risk, a trade-off between flexibility and protection. What's clear is that the sloth family, for all its reputation as nature's slowpokes, experimented with an impressive variety of survival strategies. The Megatherium shifts again, turning toward a cluster of low shrubs bursting with bright fruit. You watch as it leans forward, curling those massive claws with surprising delicacy to pluck a few berries free. Its lips purse, its jaw moves with rhythmic chomps, and for a brief moment it seems positively blissful. The same slow, peaceful rhythm that defines its existence plays on. And that rhythm isn't just physical, it's metabolic too. Scientists believe that, like modern sloths, Megatherium's internal clock ticked far slower than most mammals. Low body temperature, low respiration, low energy burn. Even its reproductive cycle likely followed this gentle tempo with long pregnancies and years between offspring. You wonder for a moment what baby Megatheriums might have looked like, small fuzzy replicas clinging close to their mother's side. And while fossilized juvenile remains are rare, some evidence suggests that young Megatheriums may have stayed with their mothers for extended periods, learning the slow art of survival at their mother's side. As the night air grows cooler, your breathing sinks with the giant sloth's long, even, unhurried. The stars above glitter like ancient eyes, watching over both of you, and for a moment, you feel as though you've slipped entirely into Megatherium's world, a world where nothing moves fast, but everything finds its place in time. The great sloth finally settles beside a fallen tree, curling slightly, its heavy body finding a comfortable pocket in the earth. It rests its head upon the soft ground and closes its eyes, releasing a soft, deep sigh. You feel your own muscles soften at the sound, as if this peaceful giant is inviting you to rest alongside it, to let go of tension, to simply be. And for now, that's enough. The pale light of dawn begins to seep through the canopy as you awaken from your light slumber. The air is cool, fresh, and thick with the earthy perfume of damp soil and crushed foliage. The Megatherium is already stirring, rising slowly like a living hill. You watch as its huge frame shifts upright with an audible creak of joints, as though even its skeleton prefers to take its time waking up. The days are changing now. The air feels subtly different, cooler, drier. You realize you're witnessing something important, the seasonal shift, that would quietly change the world of the megatherium forever. Because while predators and harsh nights posed occasional danger, it was not claws or fangs that ultimately posed the greatest threat, it was us. The arrival of humans. You walk alongside your giant companion as it resumes its quiet forage. The plants are still plentiful, the rivers full. But the world is slowly growing more crowded. In recent millennia, small bands of humans, clever, adaptive, and endlessly curious, have begun to spread across South America. And while they may not seem like a major threat to a 6-ton ground sloth at first glance, their presence signals a shift that megatherium could never have anticipated. Historians still argue when exactly humans first arrived on these lands. Some estimates place their arrival as early as 15,000 years ago, while others suggest slightly later. But whenever they appeared, they brought something entirely new to megatherium's world: advanced hunting tools, fire, organized hunting parties, and perhaps, most importantly, strategy. Unlike predators that struck quickly, humans studied their prey. They tracked migration patterns, observed feeding habits, and most dangerously worked together. A coordinated group of hunters could exploit even the weaknesses of a creature as massive as megatherium. You picture the scene: a group of early humans carefully approaching a feeding sloth, shouting, waving fire, driving it toward a natural trap like a bog or cliff edge. No direct confrontation, just slow, methodical pressure. And eventually, even a towering megatherium could stumble. But hunting may not have been the only human impact. As people spread, they cleared forests for settlements, used fire to manage vegetation, and introduced new competitors into the ecosystem. What had once been an untouched paradise slowly began to shift. Less forest meant less food. More hunting meant smaller populations. And here's where it gets even more complicated. Some researchers argue that megatherium's slow reproductive rate may have doomed it long before direct overhunting ever occurred, with pregnancies likely lasting many months, and only one offspring at a time. Population recovery was painfully slow. A few extra losses each year, whether from hunting competition or climate, could tip the scales toward extinction. Historians still debate whether humans alone caused megatherium's disappearance, or whether it was a deadly combination of factors, a perfect storm of environmental changes and human pressure. The end result, though, was the same: fewer giants roaming these forests, fewer deep footprints in the soft earth. You step around one of those ancient prints, now half filled with rainwater reflecting the soft glow of the morning sun. It's oddly sobering to imagine that every one of these massive steps led toward a quiet vanishing. And as the forest around you awakens, you notice other subtle signs of change. Birds that once perched comfortably are more skittish now. Small mammals dart nervously between shrubs. The entire ecosystem seems tense, as though sensing the arrival of a new, unpredictable force. Of course, it wasn't just megatherium that faced this new pressure. Many of its fellow megafauna vanished in the same blink of prehistory. Glyptodons, mastodons, terror birds, giant armadillos. The Pleistocene extinction event swept away much of this ancient bestiary, leaving only scattered bones and the occasional preserved dung to tell their stories. Still, the megatherium in front of you doesn't sense its own fate. It simply continues reaching, munching, sighing deeply after every slow mouthful. It is innocence embodied, blind to the ticking clock history has set in motion. You kneel beside a fallen tree, running your fingers over the bark scarred by Megatherium's claws. The grooves feel fresh but belong to a species that will soon exist only in memories and museums. And yet, even now, Megatherium's story isn't entirely lost. In caves scattered across South America, early humans left behind paintings, simple, almost childlike outlines of animals with long claws and massive bellies. Some of these ancient images might very well depict ground sloths. The debate remains open, but if true, it means that for a time, humans and Megatherium shared not only the land, but their stories. You rise and continue your quiet walk beside the great beast. Its shoulders sway with each deliberate step, its breath misting in the cool morning air. A giant who never rushed. A creature who lived in slow harmony for millions of years until one day everything around it sped up. As the sun breaks fully over the treetops, casting beams of gold across the ancient jungle, you feel the weight of history settle gently on your shoulders. The Megatherium moves forward, unaware of the changes it will never truly understand. And you're lucky enough to witness its world continue following deeper into the mystery. The jungle stretches wide before you, vibrant yet haunting, like a stage slowly losing its main actors. You walk in rhythm with the Megatherium, listening to the crunch of leaves under its enormous feet. For millions of years, these giants had ruled their world. But now you're stepping closer to the part of their story where it all starts to slip away. The quiet, strange vanishing of a species that never seemed built for extinction. The Megatherium pauses under a cluster of fruit trees, reaching lazily for breakfast as if nothing has changed. But all around it, subtle cracks are forming in the stability of its world. The weather feels less predictable. The plants it loves most are shifting their growth cycles. The forest itself is beginning to thin as seasons grow harsher, and food becomes less abundant. You see, while humans were expanding across South America, climate was staging its own assault. The last ice age was drawing to a close. Massive glaciers far to the south were melting, oceans were rising, and weather patterns grew increasingly erratic. The lush, stable forests that Megatherium depended on were shrinking, replaced by drier grasslands and patchy scrub. For a species so specifically adapted to slow foraging in dense forests, this creeping environmental shift was like pulling the floor out from under its feet. Historians still argue whether climate change or human expansion delivered the final blow. Some suggest the climate alone could have spelled doom, while others insist it was the deadly combination that ultimately toppled these lumbering giants. Either way, the result was the same: fewer trees, fewer safe places, and far less food. And food was everything to Megatherium. Its enormous bulk wasn't a luxury, it was a biological commitment. It couldn't simply downsize or adapt overnight. You can almost hear the biological math grinding away inside its gut. I need this much food to survive, but there's less of it every year. You watch as the Megatherium scrapes bark from a half-dead tree. Even in its final chapters, the creature continues its patient rituals. Its long claws curl around the thin trunk with practiced ease, stripping what little nutrition remains. And yet, despite its size and strength, you can sense a faint vulnerability now, as if this once unstoppable behemoth is quietly out of sync with the world reshaping around it. The evidence of their decline comes mostly from what they left behind: scattered bones, fossilized footprints, rare dung deposits, and even some hair samples preserved in ancient caves. Scientists have found these remnants across South America, painting a patchwork picture of their fading presence. In some locations, Megatherium seems to vanish from the fossil record just as human artifacts begin to appear. In others, the gaps are wider, hinting at long drawn-out declines rather than sudden disappearance. That uneven pattern has fueled countless academic debates with researchers still piecing together whether these giants died off quickly or dwindled slowly for thousands of years. You glance down at a cluster of ancient footprints, hardened into stone near your path. One large print is joined by smaller ones, possibly juveniles following a parent. It's a reminder that these weren't isolated loners. Megatherium likely lived in loose family groups or herds, wandering together in search of dwindling food sources. Imagine the final generations, smaller herds, traveling greater distances, foraging harder, breeding less often. The world that had once belonged to them now demanded more energy than they could afford to give. You shift your gaze back to your companion, who plods forward with steady resolve. The massive muscles ripple beneath its fur, but you notice how even its immense strength offers no protection against the slow violence of a changing world. Strength can't create food where there is none. Claws can't summon back lost forests. And still it persists, not out of defiance, but because that's all it knows to do. There's something heartbreakingly simple about it. The Megatherium isn't trying to adapt, invent tools, or change its behavior. It just continues like a slowly winding clock running down its last few ticks. Above you, a pair of prehistoric vultures circle lazily, scanning for any signs of weakness. These scavengers thrive in moments of decline, feeding on the remains of creatures who cannot keep pace with the changing world. Even the Megatherium's passing will become part of nature's endless recycling. You pause under a dense thicket as the sun climbs higher and the forest grows warmer. The Megatherium slows, perhaps feeling the heat. Its huge lungs pull in steady breaths as it lowers itself into the shade, curling partially onto its side. For a moment, you're struck again by how vulnerable even giants become. When change moves faster than biology, historians still argue whether diseases introduced by humans or their animals might have played a role. A hidden factor that added one more weight to the scales, tipping against Megatherium. Parasites, pathogens, and unfamiliar microbes could have weakened already stressed populations, making them more susceptible to starvation or predation. And just like that, an entire lineage, one that had lasted millions of years, began its quiet fade. But in this moment, you wouldn't know it. The Megatherium breathes deeply its chest, rising and falling like a peaceful hill. It naps beneath the warm sun, unfazed by the invisible threats closing in. You sit beside it, letting the calm wash over you. Its slowness is infectious, its quiet presence oddly comforting even as its kind edges closer to oblivion. The forest whispers around you, older than both of you, and yet destined to outlast you both. For now, though, you remain together, soaking in the peaceful simplicity of a creature who has mastered the art of existing even as the world prepares to leave it behind. The Megatherium stirs again as the afternoon light softens, casting long beams of gold through the shifting canopy. You follow as it rises with a familiar slow heave, stretching its massive limbs and shaking loose a small cloud of dust and leaves. Even now, even here at the edge of its era, it moves with that same unhurried grace, as if time itself bends to accommodate its rhythm. You've been trailing this great beast for what feels like days now, sinking deeper into its world. But now you find your thoughts drifting toward one of the stranger and frankly most entertaining corners of megatherium research, the hammock hypothesis. Yes, the hammock. Historians still argue whether megatherium might have had a secret hobby hanging. While we typically picture this ground sloth moving across solid earth, some researchers have proposed that its anatomy, particularly the strength and flexibility of its limbs, suggests it may have occasionally used trees, not only to feed, but to partially suspend its weight. Not like a modern tree sloth dangling completely upside down. That would have been absurd for something weighing several tons. But rather picture the megatherium rearing up between two stout trees, bracing itself on its powerful forelimbs, letting its massive belly sag gently downward like a living hammock, taking pressure off its joints while feeding or resting. It's speculative, of course. No direct fossil evidence confirms this behavior. But the biomechanics suggest that at the very least it may have used surrounding trees for balance and partial support, a primitive kind of lounging that could easily be described tongue-in-cheek as hammock behavior. You pause as the megatherium approaches two closely spaced trees. With surprising finesse, it hooks one massive claw onto a low branch, sways gently to the side, and stretches across to the second tree. For a moment, its body seems suspended, resting much of its bulk between the two trunks. You can't help but grin. As wild as the theory sounds, you're watching something that makes it oddly believable. And here lies one of the enduring fascinations with this species. Megatherium continually surprises us. The more we study it, the more it refuses to fit neatly into any single box. It's part ground-dwelling tank, part agile forager, part misunderstood relic of an evolutionary experiment that worked brilliantly, right up until it didn't. The hammock hypothesis is just one of many quirky debates that keep paleontologists arguing late into the night. Some insist Megatherium was purely terrestrial, moving from tree to tree without ever leaving the ground. Others believe its anatomy suggests a degree of behavioral flexibility we've only begun to imagine. And then there are those who wonder if Megatherium could partially suspend itself. Could it have even occasionally pulled down smaller saplings, entirely resting its forelimbs across them, while stripping the higher branches? A sort of gentle bulldozer modifying its surroundings for maximum snacking efficiency. You watch as the Megatherium does precisely that, leaning against one tree, while pulling another sapling toward its mouth, making the forest work for it, rather than the other way around. Nature's original lazy landscaper. But beyond these curious behaviors lies another intriguing question. Why did such gigantism evolve at all? Scientists believe the evolution of enormous ground sloths like Megatherium may have been driven by a combination of factors and abundance of plant food limited predators during their early evolution and competition for higher foliage that smaller animals couldn't reach. In essence, becoming bigger opened up a vertical buffet unavailable to smaller herbivores. Historians still debate whether this gigantism was inevitable or simply an odd evolutionary detour. After all, the smaller tree-dwelling sloths we see today thrive quite comfortably at their miniature size. Why grow into a 6-ton, leaf-eating skyscraper if a smaller body could do the job? The answer may lie in the prehistoric arms race of South American megafauna. As some herbivores grew larger to reach new food sources, others followed suit to avoid competition. Predators adapted, prey responded, and the ecosystem ballooned into a world where super-sized creatures ruled the land for millennia. You glance up as a light breeze stirs the canopy. Large leaves rustle gently as the megatherium finishes its slow snack and lowers its body back to the forest floor. There's a serenity to its movements and almost meditative grace that feels strangely contagious. Being near this creature makes you realize just how rarely humans experience true stillness. Its world wasn't one of adrenaline or panic. It didn't need speed. Its very bulk discouraged predators. Its claws discouraged challengers. And its food supply for most of its reign seemed endless. And yet, that same slowness that once made Megatherium a master of survival would eventually contribute to its downfall. Unable to adapt quickly to rapid environmental change or the swift tactics of newly arrived human hunters, the species found itself locked in an evolutionary trap. But for now, the Megatherium knows none of this. It simply exists. You sit nearby watching as the light filters through the trees in soft beams, the forest gently breathing in tune with the ancient sloth's slow rhythm. In this small, unbothered moment, the world feels timeless. The hammock hypothesis may never be fully proven. But here, watching your companion lean back once more, you can't help but think if any creature ever deserved to spend its days swaying gently beneath the trees, surely it was Megatherium. The afternoon stretches lazily on, much like the Megatherium itself. The heat of the day settles in the kind of humid, heavy warmth that makes even your own body want to slow down. But of course, for Megatherium, this has always been the default pace. You watch as it ambles through a small clearing, casting a long, shaggy shadow on the ground, completely indifferent to the passage of time. But beneath this calm exterior, forces are gathering forces that will test even this creature's legendary patience. Because while we've spent time exploring its quirks and behaviors, there's another growing problem pressing quietly at the edges of its world competition. The post-Ice Age climate shifts aren't just removing trees. They're encouraging grasslands to expand. And grasslands invite a whole different set of players to the table. You scan the horizon, picturing the early waves of ungulates hoofed grazers, like ancient horses' light upturns, and camel-like creatures filling in the new open spaces, feeding on the grasses that Megatherium couldn't efficiently digest. Historians still argue whether these grassland grazers directly challenged Megatherium's food supply. While it specialized in leaves, fruits, and soft plant matter, many of these newcomers could survive on tougher, drier grasses that the sloth largely ignored. But as the forests shrank and grasslands spread, Megatherium's available buffet got smaller while its competition multiplied. And where food scarcity grows, so too does desperation. You imagine younger Megatheriums ranging further than ever before, exploring unfamiliar territories, wandering into open plains, where their towering silhouettes suddenly made them easy targets for predators, or worse, for human hunting parties lying in wait. The rising competition didn't just come from herbivores either. As humans grew more sophisticated, they began domesticating animals, planting crops and transforming parts of South America's wild tangled wilderness into managed landscapes. What had once been a buffet of endless foliage for Megatherium was now being steadily reshaped into farmland villages and paths that cut directly through its home. And so, this slow-motion crisis continued too gradual for Megatherium to notice in real time, but devastating over the course of generations. You pause under a broadleaf tree and study your massive companion again. Despite the narrowing options, Megatherium carries on without complaint. It lowers its head toward a patch of ferns, curling its claws delicately around the stalks, pulling them into its mouth like a sleepy giant gardener, harvesting its personal salad bar. Its claws are both its greatest tools, and oddly, part of its evolutionary trap. Perfect for grabbing branches, pulling down leaves, or even defending itself, but completely useless for manipulating objects, building tools, or adapting in any way that might have allowed it to cope with its changing world. Unlike humans who could sharpen spears, invent traps, or store food, Megatherium's entire survival strategy was written in its very bones. Be big, be slow, eat a lot, and hope the world stays the same. And for millions of years that worked brilliantly until it didn't. You watch as a small group of prehistoric deer dart nervously across the clearing, their delicate hooves tapping lightly against the hardened ground. This is their time now. Quick, nimble herbivores perfectly suited for the evolving landscape. Megatherium watches them too briefly, lifting its heavy head, but then returns to its meal entirely unbothered by their presence. It never saw them as rivals. But nature was making choices, whether Megatherium realized it or not. Historians still debate whether rising competition was a primary factor, or simply one more straw on the camel's back. The truth is likely frustratingly complex, a web of climate habitat loss competition and human expansion, pulling in all directions at once. You walk beside the Megatherium as it ambles onward, moving toward a denser patch of trees, where the last strongholds of its preferred forests still cling to life. Here, you can almost imagine how the world once looked, when these giants were everywhere. Thousands of them browsing together across wide green landscapes that stretched endlessly to the horizon. And yet, you know this vision is fading. As dusk approaches again, the temperature drops slightly and a cool breeze picks up, stirring the long, shaggy fur of your companion. Its ears flick lazily at a buzzing insect as it pauses to rest beneath a low tree. You sit nearby, close enough to hear the deep, steady rhythm of its breathing, like the slow bellows of a giant sleeping bag. It's a strange thing sitting here, beside a creature whose entire existence seems untouched by urgency, even as extinction creeps invisibly closer. And yet, Megatherium's story isn't one of failure, it's one of duration. It lived successfully for millions of years, surviving changes, predators and challenges that would have crushed lesser species. But eventually, every advantage can become a limitation if the world shifts too far too fast. You glance up at the early stars peeking through the leaves above. This species' reign may be ending, but its legacy will outlive it in bones. In cave paintings, in the quiet footprints pressed deep into ancient mud, and of course in your own quiet admiration, you exhale slowly, matching the Megatherium's peaceful rhythm. The day fades into another timeless night, and once again, you and this ancient giant settle into the comforting hum of the forest, surrounded by echoes of the world that once belonged to them. The forest is still now. Only the soft whisper of wind through leaves and the distant call of some unseen bird interrupt the silence. You sit quietly listening to the Megatherium's breathing, deep and steady like the pulse of the ancient world itself. But while your companion naps, we step briefly forward, not in time but in discovery, toward the strange moment when humans, long after Megatherium's final breath, stumbled upon its ghost. It's the 18th century, long after the last giant ground sloth disappeared from the earth. The world of science was about to have its first real encounter with Megatherium, not through living creatures, but through bones. Far across the ocean in Europe, naturalists were beginning to piece together the strange idea that the world had once been filled with enormous animals that no longer existed. And in 1788, near Luján, Argentina, a discovery would ignite imaginations across the scientific world: a nearly complete megatherium skeleton. Spanish missionaries and local settlers uncovered enormous bones unlike anything they had seen before. The remains were eventually shipped back to Spain, arriving in Madrid, where they immediately puzzled and fascinated Europe's finest minds. You can almost picture it: scientists in powdered wigs, standing around the enormous strange skeletons, scratching their heads and arguing over what this bizarre creature might have been. At first glance, some naturalists weren't even sure if they were dealing with a real species or a biblical curiosity. Remember, this was a time when extinction itself was still a controversial concept. Many religious thinkers believed that God's creations couldn't simply disappear. Every animal must still exist somewhere on Earth. Historians still argue whether these early debates delayed a full understanding of extinction, or whether they simply reflected the genuine bewilderment of minds grappling with the shocking evidence before them. Either way, the bones of Megatherium forced a confrontation with an unsettling truth: creatures could vanish. The first formal scientific description of Megatherium came from Juan Bautista Bruderamon, an artist and anatomist, who carefully reconstructed the skeleton for display in Madrid's Royal Cabinet of Natural History, now part of the National Museum of Natural Sciences. The giant stood upright in its display, towering over the viewers who came from across Europe to stare at the bones of a monster from the past. As you sit next to your living Megatherium, it's strange to think how long humans lived without knowing these creatures had ever existed. And stranger still that their rediscovery came long after they had vanished. The fossil record, like so many ancient secrets, waited patiently beneath the soil for curious minds to stumble upon it. From Madrid, word spread rapidly across Europe's growing scientific community. The very idea of giant sloths roaming prehistoric South America sparked fascination, fueling the early fires of paleontology. At a time when the field was just being born, you imagine the letters exchanged between scholars, the sketches mailed across continents, the bold new theories shouted in candlelit halls. Some thought Megatherium resembled a bear. Others argued for its relation to modern sloths. Eventually, its true nature as a colossal ground sloth was accepted. But even then, debates raged about its behavior, diet, and lifestyle. The questions that plague scientists today: did it ever eat meat? How did it defend itself? Could it stand fully upright? Are the same ones they argued over centuries ago. And not all discoveries were confined to Europe. As South America was further explored in the 19th century, more Megatherium remains were uncovered: teeth bones, even rare patches of preserved skin and dung in some caves. Each new find offered tantalizing hints, but also raised fresh mysteries. Historians still argue whether some of these remarkably preserved remains are simply younger than we previously believed, or whether small isolated populations may have survived longer than the official extinction date suggests. Some fringe researchers even speculated into the 20th century that living ground sloths might still be hiding somewhere in remote, unexplored corners of South America. You glance around now at the dense foliage surrounding you. Could such enormous creatures really hide unnoticed? Probably not. And yet the notion is oddly comforting, an echo of hope that perhaps extinction isn't always absolute. The Megatherium shifts again, its heavy limbs curling as it dozes. Its breathing remains, even unaware that long after its kind had disappeared, its bones would inspire fierce debates, wild theories, and entire branches of science. You feel the weight of those ancient debates settle quietly around you. The argument about extinction, whether it was caused by humans' climate disease or some combination, has raged for centuries, and still no single answer fully satisfies everyone. What is certain though is that Megatherium left a trail large enough to echo into human history long after its last lumbering step. Its bones traveled across oceans. Its image captured the curiosity of emperors, artists, and young scientists just beginning to explore the world's fossilized past. And you sitting here beside your living companion feel oddly caught between those two worlds, the world where Megatherium lived and the world that only discovered it after death. The wind rustles the leaves gently, as if whispering both grief and reverence. In its own quiet way, nature has kept Megatherium's memory alive far longer than the creature itself roamed the earth. For now, you rest beside it, part of this strange timeline, where ancient giants walk again, if only in memory and imagination. The sun dips lower as evening approaches once more. The forest around you seems to soften with the fading light, the harsh contrasts of the day melting into gentle shadows. The Megatherium rises again from its resting spot, stretching with a long, deep rumble of breath. It has no sense of the complex legacy it left behind, or the intellectual battles its bones have sparked. As you continue your slow walk alongside this towering creature, your thoughts drift toward another fascinating chapter in its story, one that reaches into the heart of some of the biggest scientific debates in human history. Because while the discovery of Megatherium's bones fascinated early naturalists, it also quietly nudged the world toward much larger questions about life extinction and evolution itself. In the early 19th century, the idea that species could go extinct was still relatively new and uncomfortable for many. But Megatherium's skeleton stood as undeniable proof here. Was a creature that no longer roamed the earth. It wasn't hiding in a distant jungle. It was gone. And this fact caught the attention of a young scientist whose name you know very well, Charles Darwin. During his famous voyage on the HMS Beagle in the 1830s, Darwin explored South America, including Argentina, where Megatherium fossils had been unearthed. He collected fossil remains of several extinct giant mammals, including relatives of Megatherium. And these discoveries profoundly shaped his thinking about how life on Earth changed over time. Historians still argue exactly how influential these South American fossils were in Darwin's eventual theory of natural selection. But there's little doubt that seeing giant extinct creatures like Megatherium helped him realize that species were not fixed and eternal. They could appear, flourish, and vanish. You glance over at your living Megatherium peacefully stripping leaves from a tree branch. Its very existence feels timeless, yet its bones whisper to Darwin the uncomfortable truth that nothing is truly permanent. And the religious world wasn't exactly thrilled. At the time, many still clung to the idea that all species were created at once, perfectly designed and unchanging since the dawn of creation. The notion that God's creatures could disappear or worse, evolve, was deeply unsettling. Yet, Megatherium standing tall in museum halls was difficult to argue with. It was simply too big, too strange, and too absent to ignore. You picture Victorian visitors gazing up at the reconstructed skeleton, their imaginations racing. To them, Megatherium must have looked like something from myth, a creature out of place, challenging the very foundations of their understanding. Of course, as paleontology grew into a full-fledged science, so did the debates. Some early scientists, like Georges Cuvier, viewed Megatherium as part of a series of catastrophic events, great extinctions brought on by floods or other disasters. Cuvier, considered the father of paleontology, argued that extinction was real, but saw it as part of a series of divine resets, not evolution. Others, like Darwin, saw something more gradual, a slow, merciless competition, where only the most adaptable survived, and even giants like Megatherium could eventually fall behind. Historians still debate which factors truly drove these extinctions, but you can feel the intellectual weight of these discussions echoing even here as you walk through the same landscape those ancient bones once knew as home. The Megatherium pauses by a riverbank again, lowering its heavy head to drink. The water ripples quietly as its long tongue laps at the surface. You watch, marveling at the sheer ordinariness of its behavior, eating, drinking, resting. And yet, this very simplicity became the center of revolutionary ideas. It's strange to think how this creature, which lived in such blissful ignorance of science, theology, and philosophy, would later fuel debates that transformed them all. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining those early naturalists carefully dusting off Megatherium's enormous bones, their faces lit by lantern light, surrounded by crumbling crates and handwritten notes. Every new bone they uncovered wasn't just a discovery. It was a challenge to centuries of human certainty. Even today, Megatherium's legacy remains entangled in larger conversations about extinction. As modern species face their own struggles for survival, we're haunted by the question, will we act any differently now than the forces that once swept away these gentle giants? The Megatherium lifts its head, its nostrils flaring slightly, as the evening breeze carries scents through the air. You realize that while it may not know its own history, you are now part of its story, a witness to both its ancient life and its curious afterlife in human minds. The stars begin to blink to life above the swaying trees. The forest grows quiet again, save for the occasional chirp or rustle. You sit once more beside your giant companion, breathing in sync with its slow, steady rhythm. It has carried you not just across the prehistoric landscape, but into the very heart of human curiosity, where bones become symbols, and gentle giants like Megatherium continue to whisper their lessons across the ages. The stars shimmer above like scattered embers, tiny and endless. You sit close to your lumbering companion beneath the ancient canopy, both of you wrapped in the cool embrace of the prehistoric night. The Megatherium shifts its weight slightly, the massive frame groaning softly as it settles in once again. Its quiet breathing merges with the sounds of the forest, timeless and steady. But your thoughts are no longer confined to the ancient world. They've begun to drift toward the strange place. Megatherium now occupies in modern times a creature long gone, but somehow still very much alive in the human imagination. Because even after centuries of debate, fossil hunts and scientific papers, the world hasn't quite let Megatherium go. In fact, in recent years, our obsession with this gentle giant has only deepened, not just in dusty museums and academic journals, but in wild speculation, modern media, and even the edges of science fiction. You think of the countless documentaries that have recreated its lumbering gait, with computer graphics, its shaggy fur rustling in artificial wind, its claws glistening beneath simulated jungle light. Megatherium has become a digital celebrity of sorts, a star in countless nature programs that try to bring the Ice Age back to life for curious viewers. And then there's the more Ambitious fascination de-extinction. In the strange intersection where genetics meets ambition, some modern scientists have floated the idea of resurrecting extinct species through cloning or genetic engineering. While most of this attention focuses on the mammoth, that shaggy poster child of the Ice Age, Megatherium occasionally gets a mention too. After all, wouldn't it be spectacular to see a giant ground sloth once more ambling through the forests of South America? Historians still argue whether such a feat is even remotely possible. Unlike frozen mammoths, with relatively well-preserved DNA, Megatherium remains are mostly ancient dry bones. The chances of retrieving enough viable genetic material are staggeringly low. Still, that hasn't stopped the dreamers from speculating about using modern sloth DNA as a blueprint, splicing ancient genes into living relatives to rebuild the Megatherium. You glance at your companion. Would the world even have room for this creature again? Could we reintroduce such giants into ecosystems now dominated by highways, cities, and farmland? And even if we could, should we? Some argue that de-extinction could restore balance to ecosystems that once depended on these megafauna to spread seeds, clear underbrush, and cycle nutrients. Others warn that reintroducing extinct species into modern habitats could bring unforeseen consequences, ecological, ethical, and even legal. After all, this isn't just about science, it's about responsibility. But even beyond cloning labs and CRISPR dreams, Megatherium's presence lingers in quieter corners of the modern world. You've probably seen its name in books, games, and even the occasional cartoon, always depicted with that same curious mix of awe and affection. There's something inherently likable about this giant, its gentleness, its slowness, its quiet dignity. Unlike terrifying predators like the saber-tooth or the dire wolf, Megatherium doesn't conjure fear. It inspires wonder. It feels approachable, a giant that simply wants to nap, eat leaves, and live its unhurried life. You can't help but notice that modern humans, with our fast-paced, hyper-connected existence, seem oddly drawn to creatures like Megatherium. Maybe it's because we envy its simplicity. A life free of emails, deadlines, and social media feeds. A life where the only pressing concern is finding the next patch of soft leaves. You watch as your Megatherium companion stands again, shaking loose leaves from its fur and lumbers slowly toward another cluster of trees. Its enormous shadow moves across the moonlit ground like a floating hill, steady and deliberate. In that movement you see something eternal, an ancient rhythm that once shaped entire continents. Historians still argue whether our fascination with these creatures is rooted in nostalgia, scientific curiosity, or something deeper, a quiet awareness that we are the newcomers, that these slow giants were here, long before us, and perhaps represent a version of life we've lost. The forest hums softly around you, a natural symphony that's been playing long before any human laid eyes on a fossil. The Megatherium continues its endless search for food, its giant claws gently pulling down a branch heavy with leaves. Its eyes remain half-lidded, content, unhurried. And you sit beneath the stars, fully aware that you are a witness to something more than just an extinct animal story. You are sitting with a symbol, a reminder of nature's patience, its resilience, and its fragility. In a way, Megatherium has never really left us. Its bones may rest in museums, its DNA may be broken and scattered, but its presence remains stitched into our collective memory, resurfacing in stories, science, and dreams of what once was. And tonight, beneath the whispering leaves, you share one more moment with it, A brief reunion across time, a meeting between past and present. Section 14. The hours drift onward. You and your Megatherium companion have shared many quiet miles together, and now the forest begins to thin. The dense canopy gives way to more open land grasslands, stretching into the distance the very landscape that slowly replaced much of Megatherium's original home. The massive creature pauses at the edge of the clearing, lifting its head to sniff the air. Even here where the trees are fewer and food less abundant, it carries on with the same gentle determination. You follow your steps light beside its earth-shaking pace. And now, as you watch it wander across this open space, your mind begins to drift toward an irresistible question. The kind of question people still argue about late at night in lecture halls, podcasts, and idle daydreams. Could Megatherium survive in today's world? It's the sort of thought experiment that fascinates both scientists and regular folks alike. And while it's easy to get lost in fantasy, you quickly realize how complicated the answer truly is. Let's start with the obvious: modern ecosystems aren't what they used to be. South America today is carved by cities, highways, and farmlands. Vast stretches of ancient forests have been replaced by cattle ranches and soybean fields. Would there even be enough wild space left to support 6 tons of slowly wandering herbivore? Some scientists argue that isolated patches of protected land, massive national parks, or untouched reserves might theoretically be able to sustain a small population of revived Megatheriums if enough foliage remained to meet their colossal daily dietary needs. Historians still debate how much territory each individual Megatherium would have required. Some estimate they roamed over dozens of square miles to find enough food. Multiply that by a breeding population, and suddenly you're talking about enormous swaths of land set aside solely for these sleepy giants. And then there's the matter of predators, or rather the lack of them. In their time, Megatherium size made it practically untouchable. Today, it would face no serious predators, except perhaps one humans. Imagine a 6-ton Megatherium wandering near modern roads or villages. The very idea raises troubling questions about accidents, habitat conflicts, and the unfortunate reality that poaching still exists in many parts of the world. How long would a reintroduced Megatherium survive before crossing into dangerous contact with modern civilization? And then there's the issue of food competition. Modern-day cattle, goats, and sheep already heavily graze much of the South American landscape. Could a revived Megatherium compete for dwindling resources? Would humans even allow such competition? You picture a news report flashing across a modern screen. Traffic delayed by 20-foot giant sloth crossing highway. Social media would have a field day. Memes would flood the internet. Scientists would argue endlessly. Conservationists would clash with developers. Megatherium would become both celebrity and controversy overnight. But beyond all the logistical headaches, there's something oddly beautiful about imagining these giants moving among us again. Picture one in a protected reserve, leaning against sturdy trees, pulling down leaves, becoming the living embodiment of slowness in a world addicted to speed. A reminder of nature's ancient rhythms, wandering beneath the same stars as always. Historians still argue whether our fascination with reviving extinct species is driven by genuine conservation or simply human guilt, an attempt to undo damage we know we've caused. Megatherium's extinction was not an isolated event after all. It's part of the broader wave of megafaunal losses that accompanied human expansion across the globe. Could we ever truly fix what was lost? Or are we simply longing for something we can never fully recover? You glance at your companion again, watching as it reaches for a patch of leafy shrubs, munching lazily under the early glow of moonlight. Its eyes remain calm, unaware of the philosophical storm raging around its hypothetical return. And maybe that's the lesson. Megatherium doesn't worry about territory disputes, or genetic engineering or ethical debates. It lives in the moment, always has. It eats. It rests. It simply exists. That perhaps is its quiet wisdom. The breeze picks up, rustling the grasses like waves across an ancient sea. The great beast shifts its massive weight, moving forward again with its familiar rolling sway. You walk beside it, your own breath slowing to match its deep, steady rhythm. You've now traveled far across both space and time, from dense prehistoric jungles to open modern grasslands, to the strange, speculative future where science dreams of second chances. And still the Megatherium moves forward, unhurried, unbothered, unchanged. The world may have moved on without it, but here beneath the stars, you remain together, two unlikely companions, sharing the quiet persistence of life. Section 15. The night air grows cooler, and the last glimmers of moonlight shimmer across the open grasslands. Your journey with Megatherium, both literal and across the ages, is nearing its gentle conclusion. You walk beside the giant as it slows its pace, its breath forming soft clouds that hang momentarily in the crisp, ancient air. Ahead, a patch of dense trees marks a familiar return to safety, a pocket of forest where leaves still flourish and shadows offer comfort. The Megatherium sways forward, unbothered by the distance it has traveled. It knows only the present moment, as it always has. You pause to take in the scene. This towering creature, once part of massive herds that roamed an entire continent, now seems almost solitary. But solitude suits it. Megatherium was never a creature of panic or noise. Its life was slow, measured, deliberate. Even now, long after its species faded from the earth, its presence remains deeply calming, a testament to endurance, patience, and the power of simply existing. As the giant eases itself beneath a tall tree, curling its massive body into a comfortable resting position, your mind gently drifts through the echoes of its story one final time. For millions of years, Megatherium had thrived. From the moment it first appeared in South America during the Pliocene epoch, it grew and spread, adapting to lush forests, weathering ice ages, and sharing its world with predators, prey, and relatives that have long since vanished. It saw giant terror birds stalk the grasslands, saber-toothed cats prowl in the shadows, and towering glyptodonts shuffle across its ancient world. It survived shifting climates, roaring rivers, and long, hungry droughts. Its size, its claws, its slow heartbeat, all perfectly tuned for the rhythm of its time. But then came the changes it could not adapt to. The rise of humans, the shrinking of forests, the transformation of its home into something unrecognizable, the slow creep of scarcity that even patience couldn't outlast. Historians still argue how long Megatherium lingered as its world shifted beneath its feet. Did isolated groups hang on in hidden pockets? Did the last ones live quietly, their final moments unseen? We may never know. The fossil record offers only fragments. A tooth here, a bone there. Silent witnesses to a long, slow fade. And yet, despite extinction, Megatherium never truly disappeared. Its bones spark debates that reshaped science itself. Its fossils helped Darwin, Cuvier, and countless others build our understanding of evolution and extinction. Its giant skeletons still stand in museums where wide-eyed children and curious adults gaze upward, imagining the world as it once was. Even today, as scientists debate cloning, climate change, and conservation, Megatherium's story echoes like a distant heartbeat, a reminder of both nature's resilience and its fragility. You sit beside your companion one last time, listening to its slow, steady breath as it dozes beneath the ancient trees. The forest hums softly, a natural lullaby carried by the wind. And for a while, you simply breathe together. No rush, no fear, no future worries. Just now. The forest has grown hushed now. Even the insects seem to whisper rather than buzz. You rest against the cool earth, your body heavy, your breathing soft, fully settled into the Megatherium's timeless rhythm. The stars above glow gently scattered like ancient jewels across the dark velvet sky. Their steady light feels calming, distant but present, much like the long-lost world you've traveled through tonight. You can almost feel the pulse of the forest beneath you, the quiet heartbeat of roots pressing through the soil, the slow creak of trees swaying gently overhead, the steady rhythm of your own breath blending into this ancient melody. The great Megatherium sighs in its sleep beside you, its massive chest rising and falling each breath like a soft drumbeat that lulls your thoughts into stillness. Its fur rustles slightly with each exhale, as if the air itself bends to its peaceful cadence. The long journey you've taken through time, through extinction, through discovery, now settles into this single quiet moment. There's nothing left to chase, nothing more to uncover. Only stillness, only breath. And as your eyes grow heavier, you feel your body relax completely, muscles softening, mind quieting, breath slowing, sinking into the same calm the Megatherium has known all along. The stars remain patient and gentle as you finally drift into sleep.